The Heroes of Olympus, Book 4, The House of Hades, by Rick Riordan. Chapter 61, Percy. Percy wasn't dead yet, but he was already tired of being a corpse. As they trudged toward the heart of Tartarus, he kept glancing down at his body, wondering how it could belong to him. His arms looked like bleached leather pulled over sticks. His skeletal legs seemed to dissolve into smoke with every step. He'd learned to move normally within the death mist, more or less, but the magical shroud still made him feel like he was wrapped in a coat of helium. He worried that the death mist might cling to him forever, even if they somehow managed to survive Tartarus. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life looking like an extra from The Walking Dead. Percy tried to focus on something else, but there was no safe direction to look. Under his feet, the ground glistened a nauseating purple, pulsing with webs of veins. In the dim red light of the blood clouds, Death Mist Annabeth looked like a freshly risen zombie. Ahead of them was the most depressing view of all. Spread to the horizon was an army of monsters, flocks of winged arai, tribes of lumbering cyclopes, clusters of floating evil spirits. Thousands of baddies, maybe tens of thousands, all milling restlessly, pressing against one another, growling and fighting for space, like the locker area of an overcrowded school between classes, if all the students were roid-raging mutants who smelled really bad. Bob led them toward the edge of the army. He made no effort to hide, not that it would have done any good. Being 10 feet tall and glowing silver, Bob didn't do stealth very well. About 30 yards from the nearest monsters, Bob turned to face Percy.
"Stay quiet, and stay behind me," he advised. "They will not notice you."
"We hope," Percy muttered. On the Titan's shoulder, small Bob woke up from a nap. He purred seismically and arched his back, turning skeletal, then back to calico. At least he didn't seem nervous. Annabeth examined her own zombie hands. "Bob, if we're invisible, how can you see us? I mean, you're technically,
"Yes," Bob said, "but we are friends."
"Nyx and her children could see us," Annabeth said.
Bob shrugged. "That was in Nyx's realm. That is different."
Right. Annabeth didn't sound reassured, but they were here now. They didn't have any choice but to try. Percy stared at the swarm of vicious monsters.
"Well, at least we won't have to worry about bumping into any other friends in this crowd." Bob grinned. "Yes, that is good news. Now, let's go. Death is close."
"The doors of death are close," Annabeth corrected. "Let's watch the phrasing." They plunged into the crowd. Percy trembled so badly, he was afraid the death mist would shake right off him. He'd seen large groups of monsters before. He'd fought an army of them during the Battle of Manhattan. But this was different. Whenever he'd fought monsters in the mortal world, Percy at least knew he was defending his home. That gave him courage, no matter how bad the odds were. Here, Percy was the invader. He didn't belong in this multitude of monsters any more than the Minotaur belonged in Penn Station at rush hour. A few feet away, a group of Impuzai tore into the carcass of a griffin, while other griffins flew around them, squawking in outrage. A 6-armed Earthborn and a Lystragonian giant pummeled each other with rocks, though Percy wasn't sure if they were fighting or just messing around. A dark wisp of smoke, Percy guessed it must be an Eidolon, seeped into a Cyclops, made the monster hit himself in the face, then drifted off to possess another victim. Annabeth whispered, "Percy, look." A stone's throw away, a guy in a cowboy outfit was cracking a whip at some fire-breathing horses. The wrangler wore a Stetson hat on his greasy hair, an extra-large set of jeans, and a pair of black leather boots. From the side, he might have passed for human, until he turned, and Percy saw that his upper body was split into 3 different chests, each one dressed in a different color western shirt. It was definitely Geryon, who had tried to kill Percy 2 years ago in Texas. Apparently, the evil rancher was anxious to break in a new herd. The idea of that guy riding out of the doors of death made Percy's sides hurt all over again. His ribs throbbed where the Arai had unleashed Geryon's dying curse back in the forest. He wanted to march up to the 3-bodied rancher, smack him in the face, and yell, "Thanks a lot, Tex." Sadly, he couldn't. How many other old enemies were in this crowd? Percy began to realize that every battle he'd ever won had only been a temporary victory. No matter how strong or lucky he was, no matter how many monsters he destroyed, Percy would eventually fail. He was only one mortal. He would get too old, too weak, or too slow. He would die. And these monsters, they lasted forever. They just kept coming back. Maybe it would take them months or years to reform, maybe even centuries. But they would be reborn. Seeing them assembled in Tartarus, Percy felt as hopeless as the spirits in the river Cocytus. So what if he was a hero? So what if he did something brave? Evil was always here, regenerating, bubbling under the surface. Percy was no more than a minor annoyance to these immortal beings. They just had to outweight him. Someday, Percy's sons or daughters might have to face them all over again. Sons and daughters. The thought jarred him. As quickly as hopelessness had overtaken him, it disappeared. He glanced at Annabeth. She still looked like a misty corpse, but he imagined her true appearance. Her gray eyes full of determination, her blonde hair pulled back in a bandana, her face weary and streaked with grime, but as beautiful as ever. Okay, maybe monsters kept coming back forever, but so did demigods. Generation after generation, Camp Half-Blood had endured, and Camp Jupiter. Even separately, the two camps had survived. Now, if the Greeks and Romans could come together, they would be even stronger. There was still hope. He and Annabeth had come this far. The doors of death were almost within reach. Sons and daughters. A ridiculous thought. An awesome thought. Right there in the middle of Tartarus, Percy grinned. "What's wrong?" Annabeth whispered. With his zombie death mist disguise, Percy probably looked like he was grimacing in pain. "Nothing," he said. "I was just..." Somewhere in front of them, a deep voice bellowed, "Iapetus!"